Dear Psykill, who's your favorite superhero? As if I would be caught reading your tawdry Earth comic books. But your question does remind me of a brush the Renegades had with a self-styled superhero of our own. That particular escapade began in the Unicom laboratory of the human scientist Professor MacDonald Guffin, who had called upon the Guardians to help study the new element he had synthesized. They were the only ones who could do it safely, as he calculated that metallic GoBots bodies would be immune to any radioactive or chemical injury from the mysterious new substance that he termed MacGuffium. Of course, Scooter jumped at the chance, and Smallfoot, AJ, and Nick all accompanied him to Guffin's lab. But Smallfoot and AJ soon found the rigorous study to which Scooter and the professor subjected the MacGuffium to be boring, and began to hunger for some action. "Be careful what you wish for, twerps," came a cackling reply as Crasher, Copter, and myself smashed through the laboratory wall, intent on taking the MacGuffian for our own. Alas, in the course of the brief battle, a stray blaster shot from Copter struck the MacGuffian, initiating a chain reaction that pushed it towards explosion. Ever the masters of self-preservation, we renegades quickly made ourselves scarce, while the Guardians and their allies took cover, only for AJ to notice that the professor had been knocked out during the fight. She broke cover to drag him to safety, just managing to push him behind one of the lab's protective screens before the MacGuffian detonated, bathing her in its strange radiation. A few hours later, AJ awoke in a Unicom infirmary, seemingly none the worse for wear. Scooter and Guffin were both adamant that she be thoroughly studied to make sure she was all right. But the isolation of quarantine soon began to get to AJ, and she easily convinced Smallfoot into letting her out of the infirmary so she could get some fresh air. While the pair were driving through city streets, they came upon an apartment building that was being consumed by a fire. All the building's occupants appeared to have been evacuated, but a lone child's cries were then heard from a top-floor window. Without thinking, AJ raced into the inferno, where she found the infant in question pinned beneath the collapsed beam. With a surge of strength, AJ hauled the beam off the child and carried outside to safety. It was only as the adrenaline began to wear off that AJ realized how easily she had lifted such a great weight, at which point part of the building collapsed, and a ton of rubble came cascading down on top of her. But after a tense moment, the masonry was suddenly hurled aside, as AJ emerged from beneath the debris without a scratch on her. Looking down at her own hands, AJ realized that the MacGuffian radiation had granted her superpowers, and after a moment of silence, the crowd erupted in cheers of this new hero in their midst. "You go, girl," one bystander whooped. Thought AJ. Go, girl. Well, needless to say, what followed was exactly as you expect. Wearing a makeshift costume and performing brash acts of heroism, the super strong, super tough, super fast Go Girl, with Smallfoot as her Go-mobile, started making headlines. Everything from stopping bank heists to rescuing cats stuck in trees, a positively sickening misuse of such power. The girl started to think herself invincible, refusing to take advice from anyone. Even Smallfoot began to question her judgment when she started taking bigger and bigger risks, pushing her powers to dangerous limits. After all, Smallfoot pointed out, how did they even know her new abilities were permanent? But fame and power had gone to AJ's head. Why would she need to waste time thinking anything through when no harm could come to her? The two had a huge argument, which ended with Go-Girl deciding to go it alone. That was the perfect moment for my renegades to strike. As a steaming mad Smallfoot was on her way back to the command center, we jumped the young GoBot and captured her. I personally sent an ultimatum to Go-Girl, promising her that Smallfoot's life would be forfeit if she did not use her superpowers in my service. Warned against alerting the other Guardians, the resigned Super Zero stole all that I desired, from exotic technology and weaponry to gold, jewels, and cash. Go-Girl goes bad, the newspapers proclaimed. Ah, a most excellent jape. Though upon reflection, I fear it might have been a bit aimless as schemes go. Do you know, I can't even recall what my endgame was going to be. Regardless, things came to an end soon enough when, just as she was about to carry out the theft of a priceless jewel I desired, AJ discovered that her superpowers had vanished. Just as Smallfoot had warned, just as AJ herself had refused to accept the possibility of, the MacGuffian radiation had at last worn off. Knowing that I would destroy Smallfoot if I thought that Go-Girl was no longer of use to me, AJ was left desperate. Imagine the surprise on the faces of the Guardians a short time later, when Go-Girl was caught in the act smuggling a hunk of newly synthesized MacGuffian out of Guffin's lab. Her friends tried to talk her down, but she managed to evade them and get away, apologizing profusely, but insisting that she needed the element. An attempt to regain the superpowers she had lost? You would be forgiven for thinking so. Within the hour, she met with me and my renegades in the warehouse we were using to stockpile our loot, and presented me with a box that she claimed contained the successfully purloined jewel. I gleefully opened the box as Crasher and Copter leaned in to look, only for all three of us to be hit full force by the explosion of a chunk of destabilized MacGuffian. Racing past our sprawled bodies, AJ undid Smallfoot's bonds, explaining that the loss of her powers had finally forced her to stop and think, like everyone had been telling her to. Rather than charge into action, she had put her mind to work and come up with a way to save her friend. Disoriented and weakened by the blast, but still furious, I tried to grab the girl, but Smallfoot leaped to her defense, blasting me across the warehouse. Willing to cut my losses, I called retreat, leaving our ill-gotten goods behind. That takes care of them, Smallfoot puffed out her chest. We better get all this stuff back to where it belongs, and explain to everyone at the command center what happened. Thanks, Smallfoot, AJ grinned. You're my hero.